Tristan enjoyed tutoring younger children and was happy to help out. He made his way to Wanda's room and tapped lightly on the door. Wanda was quietly trying to do her homework, but she found she couldn't concentrate on the questions. They kept floating in the air in front of her. She bit the end of her pen and forced herself to think straight, but she couldn't immerse herself in her studies anymore. She heard the tap on the door and looked up just as Tristan entered the room. The light from the window fell on his cheek, outlining his profile as he walked up to her. His face was very similar to Callum's, and Wanda tried to discern the physical differences between the two of them. Tristan was wearing a collared shirt with a thin wool jumper over the top and a pair of casual pants. The ensemble made him look less serious and more approachable than usual. "Hey, Tristan." "Hey. Would you like some help with anything?" Wanda knew that Tristan wouldn't have used his own initiative to offer his help. She guessed that her mother was probably behind it. She pushed the work she was busy with toward him. "Yeah, I can't answer any of these." He pulled up a chair and sat down beside her. He took her book and glanced at the questions. To him, they seemed really easy. He took her draft paper and a pen, and he began to analyze the questions, explaining his calculations as he went. Wanda listened carefully and followed his train of thought. She found that he had a very good way of explaining his actions. And it wasn't long until she realized that the problems hadn't been that difficult after all. From time to time, she would add some of her own views and thoughts, proving that she understood the question. Then, she took another piece of paper and completed them all by herself. Afterward, she showed Tristan the answers, and he nodded with satisfaction. "You got it. That's the correct method." They moved on to the next set of problems. They were quite different from the first, and Tristan was afraid that Wanda wouldn't fully grasp the solutions. He wrote down 2 similar questions of his own, which he hoped might help. She liked his handwriting. It was very neat, just like him. She watched his face as he wrote. It was serious and full of concentration. His long eyelashes touched his cheeks as he looked down at the paper. He looked so much like Callum, but their 2 personalities were poles apart. She tried to remember how Callum looked when he was writing. She recalled a time when he had been trying to teach her creative writing. He had leaned back on his chair with his legs crossed, and he had scrawled something on the paper. His hand had danced across the page haphazardly. He had even been chewing gum. When she hadn't been able to think of anything to write, he had tapped her on the head with the end of his pen. Then, as she had been thinking, he hadn't sat patiently like Tristan did. He had fidgeted in his chair and played with his phone, while simultaneously spinning his pen around between his fingers. He had been good at spinning the pen, she had noticed. She had watched him do it several times, but she had never been able to do it herself, and he had teased her more than once. As Wanda's memories filled her mind, a slight smile formed on the corners of her mouth. By then, the sound of Tristan's voice brought her back to the present moment. "Something distracting you?" She jumped to attention and realized he had been waiting for her to tackle the problem he had set for her. "Sorry, Tristan. My mind wandered for a moment." Without responding, Tristan pushed the paper in front of her. "I'm giving you 10 minutes to complete these 2 questions. If you can do it within the time, you'll have pretty much mastered them." He set the timer on his watch and sat up straight. She could see that he meant business, and she wasn't going to let him down. Although Tristan was only a few minutes older than Callum, he had always seemed years older to Wanda and much less approachable. Often, when she had talked to him growing up, she had felt somewhat nervous. But as soon as she solved the problem, he didn't play on his phone the way Callum had. Instead, he stood up and walked to the bookshelf, turning his back to her. Distracted again, she looked up at his tall, straight figure and his broad shoulders. Then, remembering she only had a few minutes to complete the work he had set, she concentrated on solving the questions and tried hard to not look at him again. Tristan's gaze swept across the bookshelf. He had read many of the books for pleasure, including the textbooks. He selected a few that he thought were suitable for Wanda, and then he picked out a math book and took them all back to the desk. As Wanda worked, Tristan sat down quietly and flipped through the books he had selected. She seemed to know what she was doing, and he figured that she wouldn't need much more tuition, so he put the books back on the shelf in an orderly manner, all except one. Wanda was pleasantly surprised to find that she knew how to solve all the questions. She had been shown how to do them in school, and she had understood it at the time, but when it came to practicing on her own at home, she found she just couldn't remember any of it. But Tristan had rewritten the questions in a way that made it much easier to understand, and she completed them all with enough time to check through her answers. Just then, the timer rang on Tristan's watch. "Time's up." Wanda spun around in her chair, but she didn't look very confident. "I'm done. What do you think?" He picked up her paper, and with just a quick scan, he could see that she had answered them all correctly. "Looks like you've grasped it." "Have I?" Wanda was delighted, and her eyes shone. "Did I get them all right?" "You sure did." He handed her the book he had kept from the bookshelf. "When you have time, take a look through this." "Okay." She flipped through the book briefly and then put it on her desk. They worked through the rest of the questions until Wanda was confident that she understood them all. She felt enlightened, and she felt that the fog that had filled her mind since the start of the school year had finally dispersed. "Thank you, Tristan. I think my grades should start improving a little this semester now." Tristan agreed, and then he casually picked up her language examination paper from the end of the previous semester. "How did you do so badly in this? Did you really not understand it?" Wanda's expression froze. Math was one thing, but she had always been good at languages, and it was unusual for her to have done so badly in the test. The air in the room became a little tense. Tristan's eyes were locked on her. She had nowhere to hide, so she met his gaze. "He's so serious all the time, not at all like Callum." Callum liked to laugh and tease her. Sometimes he was naughty, but his behavior always made her feel happy. Tristan was difficult to get close to, and he made her feel a little uncomfortable. She looked away from him, and he took the initiative to break the awkwardness. "Is it because of my brother?" "What? Do you blame yourself?" Wanda couldn't speak. She stared at his face, which was so similar to Callum's, and without realizing what she was doing, she burst into tears. "Oh, I miss him so much, Tristan." The last thing he had expected was for Wanda to cry in front of him, and he didn't know what to do. Rebecca had rarely wept when they were growing up, so he wasn't used to being around girls who cried. But Wanda was clearly different from Rebecca. Once she started crying, her tears flowed uncontrollably, and she sobbed helplessly. Tristan felt useless. He took a step toward her and placed his hand on her shoulder. "Don't blame yourself." Wanda shook her head and stood up. She gazed at him through a shroud of tears, and then she threw herself into his arms. "Oh, I miss Callum." Tristan stood rooted to the spot. He held her tightly, and for the first time in his life, his frosty exterior began to melt. Wanda cried her heart out as she buried her face against Tristan's chest. The more she sobbed, the more her chest heaved, and her tears streamed down her face. For a brief moment, she felt as though Callum had returned. Tristan's body stiffened slightly as he held Wanda's trembling body in his arms. He didn't rub her back to comfort her, but he didn't let go of her either. Instead, he let her cry, and he felt her warm tears soak his shirt. Wanda eventually started to calm down and began to catch her breath again. Her eyes were red and swollen, and she felt weak. Tristan reached for a box of tissues on the table and held it out to her. She gave him a feeble smile and wiped her face. She had been so lost in her emotions that she had momentarily forgotten it was Tristan, not Callum, holding her in his arms. She glanced at his shirt and suddenly felt embarrassed. Tristan pretended not to notice. "Do you feel a bit better now?" Wanda nodded slowly and took a tissue from the box in his hand. She leaned against him slightly and realized he was much taller than her, as her head only reached his broad shoulders. She lowered her head. "I've stained your shirt." Her voice was soft and muffled, and she sounded as if she were grieving. Tristan rubbed his temples before taking a tissue in an attempt to dry his shirt. He looked at her messy hair, and his heart softened. It's going to be okay. I still have hope that we'll find Callum. Wanda looked up at him with wide eyes. Tristan gave her a half shrug. And he's not going to be very impressed when he returns and finds out your grades have dropped. She stared blankly at him for a few seconds, and a tiny shimmer of light appeared in her eyes, as if she had found a glimmer of hope to hold on to again. So, do you think he'll return if my grades improve? He frowned slightly and hesitated. Yeah. Wanda bit her bottom lip and exhaled. I'll work much harder from now on. That's good. I'm here if you need any help. Wanda nodded. Thanks, Tristan. He left Wanda's room and found Beau waiting outside. Beau gawked at Tristan's soaked shirt. That's not fair. It's okay for Wanda to bawl her eyes out, but you can't stand it if I cry. Tristan glanced at him with an indifferent look and didn't respond. Beau shrugged. You're so boring. Sometimes worry about whether you'll ever get married one day. He walked to the couch and tugged at Cassandra's ponytail to irritate her before he took his phone out of his pocket to send a message. Hey, Maddie. Missing me yet? His phone beeped almost immediately. Yeah, I always do. Do you want to visit the night market near my house tomorrow night? There's a lady who makes the best meatballs. Yeah, that sounds like fun. Maddie replied with a cute nodding emoticon. Beau smiled. Sweet dreams. I hope they're about me. She responded with an emoticon of a kissing face. He slipped his phone back into his pocket and reached over to tug at Cassandra's ponytail again. She jumped up and tried to punch him in the shoulder, but he dodged her and quickly hid behind Luke. You're going to have to get past my brother first if you want to get to me. Cassandra laughed. Is that so? She turned to her little brother. Help me beat up both of them. Jason was always ready to fight the Sloan twins and eagerly pounced on them. The four of them rolled on the floor with their legs flailing about. They pulled at each other's hair as they wrestled and threw punches. Their parents ignored them and let them play. Wanda eventually came out of her room. She had tidied herself up and had a determined look in her eyes. She began to work harder, and she focused in class. She smiled more often, although she still grieved for Callum. Her grades improved, and she soon became top of her class again. It had been a hectic year for Rebecca, and she had discovered that being in the Army differed from training at the Air Force Academy. Although she didn't go out on missions, she had learned a lot working in the workshops and with the ground control squad, and seldom had any spare time. Most of the soldiers in the airborne squad had been handpicked by Kyle, and were all older than Rebecca, making her the youngest in their squad. She was also one of the few female soldiers stationed at the base, and was well cared for, especially in the canteen. Her admirers often brought her an extra helping of her favorite foods, and traded it for the meal she didn't like. It was almost time for the military base's Mid-Autumn Festival. The venue had been set up, and the division in charge of planning the event was wrapping up the final preparations before the festivities began. The festival was one of the few occasions where the soldiers had the opportunity to dress up. The men wore formal dress suits, while the women were allowed to wear pretty dresses and makeup. Rebecca had completed her morning duties, and after eating a light lunch, she hurried back to her room to shower and get dressed. She seldom wore anything other than her military fatigues and comfortable sweats, let alone makeup. One of the other female soldiers stopped past her room and asked if she needed assistance with her hair and makeup. She smiled and politely said she would let her know. She took a quick shower and dried her hair before putting on a simple white satin dress with a sweetheart neckline. She sat in front of her small mirror and began to do her makeup. She heard a sharp knock on her door as she was about to apply eyeliner, and she thought that the other soldier had returned to help her, so she didn't bother to get up and open the door. Come in, it's not locked. She continued to trace the eyeliner around her eyes carefully. It was easy to mess up, and she concentrated hard, not noticing who had entered her room. When she had completed both eyes, she looked away from the mirror and up at the person who had knocked on her door. To her surprise, she saw Kyle standing behind her. He was wearing a military dress suit and looked very handsome. The tailored suit accentuated his perfect posture, and the badges and insignias on his collar glistened in the light. He smiled at her. "You haven't done your eyebrows yet." Rebecca nodded. "I'll do them last." Kyle leaned against the doorframe and quietly watched her brush a soft rosy rouge on her cheeks. She picked up an eyebrow pencil and was about to do her eyebrows when Kyle suddenly leaned over and gestured for her to hand the pencil to him. She was slightly taken aback, but obligingly placed the pencil in his open palm. He turned her face toward him and squatted down to her eye level. Rebecca leaned against the back of her chair, and the corners of her mouth curled into a bemused smile. Kyle inched closer and placed his hand on the back of the chair to steady himself before starting to line her eyebrows. His proximity to her made her acutely aware of his masculinity. He had an authoritative and domineering presence that seemed to demand her attention. He drew nearer, and she felt trapped between him and her chair. She gazed at his calm face and strong hands, calloused from years of wielding weapons and flying aircraft. The pencil pressed against her skin, and she was surprised to find his touch gentle and soft. She didn't move a muscle. Instead, she breathed in the sweet scent of his cologne and felt his warm breath against her face. Her heart began to race, and her breathing quickened. Rebecca forced herself to calm down, and she quietly sized him up. Kyle's skin was tanned dark from being out in the hot sun, and his features were both hard and exquisite. She imagined him dressed in a business suit and tie, sitting behind a desk in an office. He was focused and concentrated his attention on the task at hand. His long, thick eyelashes cast a deep shadow over his cheekbones, making his eyes appear larger. The bridge of his nose was straight, and Rebecca felt an urge to reach out and touch it, but she restrained herself and tried to suppress her restless thoughts. Kyle exhaled slowly. The first eyebrow is done. Rebecca noticed that he had a soft smile on his lips that she had never seen before. She thought his strong character and look of determination must have overshadowed the natural feature on his face. He suddenly reminded her of Callum. Her brother was the opposite of Kyle. He was mischievous and easygoing. Her heart sank as she thought of him. Kyle let go of the back of her chair and gently lifted her chin. He gazed at her for a moment and squinted his eyes slightly before drawing on her other eyebrow. Rebecca took a deep breath and secretly hoped he was doing a decent job. He was a combat soldier, not a makeup artist, and she wondered if his hands were steady enough for a task that required fine motor skills and perfect hand control. She sat dead still and hardly breathed, afraid that any movement would ruin the effect. She tried to relax her tense shoulders and neck and allowed him to gently tilt her head to the side. His serious expression softened, and he smiled, seemingly pleased with his work. All done. Take a look in the mirror. Rebecca turned her head and looked at herself in the mirror. Her face looked different from what she had become accustomed to, and she barely recognized herself. The eyeliner and eyeshadow accentuated her large almond-shaped eyes, and she was pleasantly surprised to see that Kyle had done her eyebrows perfectly. Her eyes sparkled, and she felt like a princess. She wanted to say something, but Kyle leaned closer to her again. Their cheeks almost touched as his reflection joined hers in the mirror. She felt his breath against her ear. Do you like it? She nodded. You did a good job. They turned to face each other at the same time, and their lips almost touched. Rebecca quickly lowered her head and pursed her lips. A tingling sensation washed over her, and she felt butterflies in her stomach. She smiled and looked up at him again. You seem to have many hidden talents. Kyle smiled, but didn't reply. She grinned. If I didn't know better, I might have mistaken you for a makeup artist. How often have you done a lady's eyebrows? He inched closer, and their noses were mere inches away. He stared into her eyes. Are you asking me about my previous relationships? Rebecca blinked and blushed. No. He smiled and tapped his fingers against her nose. You've promised to be my girlfriend, so I should tell you. Rebecca rolled her eyes. You don't have to. A mischievous light flickered in his eyes. Are you sure? I don't mind telling you. But Rebecca knew what he had meant. If they were to become serious, he would have to tell her. She suddenly felt a hint of jealousy in her heart. Kyle was handsome and manly, and she was sure he had had a few girlfriends. The smug look on his face irritated her, and his teasing made her want to punch him. She turned away from him and checked her makeup once more before picking up her script to run through her lines again. She had rehearsed her lines several times with Kyle and had already memorized them, but she used it as an excuse to ignore him. He stood up and stretched his arms and back, but kept his gaze on her. She felt his eyes on her, but she lowered her head and pretended to read the script. It felt as if his eyes were boring into her, and she was about to give him a dirty look when he squatted in front of her again and lifted her chin to gaze directly into his eyes. There hasn't been a single one. Her back stiffened, and she continued to ignore him. He took the script from her hand and placed it on the table. Becky, I've never had a girlfriend. I've worked hard at school and didn't have time for girls. When I joined the military, I focused on advancing my career. I've only been interested in you for as long as I can remember. Rebecca took in a sharp breath and held the air in her lungs. She didn't have the script in her hand to hide her feelings, and Kyle's confession had taken her by surprise. She pouted. I'm not interrogating you. I don't care what you did before you met me. Kyle didn't let on that he knew it bothered her. Instead, he smiled. I don't want you to misunderstand. I want you to know the truth. She looked down at his hand cupped around her chin, and her long eyelashes fluttered as the feeling of jealousy disappeared. She didn't say anything. Instead, she gazed at the calluses on his fingers and thought about how he could apply makeup like an expert, play the piano like a concert pianist, and shoot a gun like an assassin. Kyle was worried that she still didn't believe him, so he tried his best to explain. I used to help my sister with her makeup when I was a young boy. I'd love for you to meet her one day. Rebecca nodded absent-mindedly. She reached out and took his hand in hers. She turned his hand over and studied his palm. Kyle watched her, and he thought about how intense she was. She was obedient yet defiant, independent yet uncertain, and sometimes outright strange. She noticed a wound on his hand that had recently healed and had left a pale pink scar. Is this from your last mission? He nodded. Yeah, I got cut by barbed wire. She gently rubbed her fingertips over the scar. Does it hurt? Not anymore. I didn't feel much at the time. Rebecca's brows knitted together. Was it because you were in a dangerous situation and didn't notice? Yeah, something like that. She bit her bottom lip and hesitated before asking. What were you thinking about when you called me that one night? His eyes softened. I was thinking about you. He noticed that her hand had started to tremble. She lowered her eyes. Please don't call me if you're in danger next time. I came back, didn't I? He sighed and clasped his hands around hers. She tried to pull back, but he held on to her. One day, when we go on a mission together, promise me you'll listen to me and not run off to places I tell you to stay away from. She nodded. Yeah, I promise. But I don't want anyone to think you're treating me differently. I don't care what anyone else thinks. I've treated you differently ever since I met you. And one day, I hope to have the right to be biased. Rebecca withdrew her hand and looked up at him with large eyes. She knew what he had meant. Although she came across as brave and confident, he made her feel timid and vulnerable. He gazed at her. Do you still think falling in love now is a bad idea? My mother only started dating when she was 20. He chuckled. Okay, then I'll wait for you to turn 20. She grabbed his hand again and ran her fingers over his knuckles. His hand was so different from hers. It was broad and strong. What do you think you'd look like with nail polish on your fingernails? Kyle grinned. You dare try to paint my nails? She looked up at him with a twinkle in her eyes. What if I did it when you were asleep? She imagined their squad seeing their captain salute them with bright red fingernails, and she burst out laughing. Kyle shrugged. I suppose if you paint all 10 fingernails, I'd have to kiss you for each nail you painted. Rebecca blushed and let go of Kyle's hand. She looked up and glared at him. She didn't like to be teased, and he was very good at getting under her skin when he poked fun at her. She suddenly felt so outraged that she thought she should consider changing regimens. Kyle saw her jaw tighten and realized that she was being oversensitive. He glanced at his watch. I have to go to a meeting. I'll send someone to drive you to the festival, and we could meet there. Rebecca stood and opened the door for him. He stopped before he walked out and leaned close to whisper in her ear. So, my girlfriend is a jealous woman. He flashed a cheeky grin and strode off before she could react. Rebecca clenched her jaw and wanted to punch him in the shoulder, but she couldn't catch up with him since she was wearing a dress and heels. She muttered under her breath and returned to her room. Kyle infuriated her. He had coaxed her into asking about his previous girlfriends on purpose. He had known exactly what he was doing and had shamelessly flirted with her. She decided to step on his feet with her heels later when they performed. The Mid-Autumn Festival was about to begin. Rebecca arrived just in time and found her seat among the rest of her squad. The men looked handsome and polished in their smart dress suits. The auditorium was packed, and the audience waited quietly for the head of the military base to welcome everyone before handing over to the master of ceremonies to lead the evening's program. The first item on the program was a performance by the military choir. They sang beautifully, and even though the choir comprised of soldiers, they sounded like professionals. One singer in particular stood out, and Rebecca applauded loudly when their performance ended. Her and Kyle's performance had been listed as the 5th item on the program, so they slipped out of the auditorium and went backstage shortly before the 3rd item began. The rest of their squad was excited to finally have a talented female among their group, and they were confident that Kyle and Rebecca's performance would be a hit. Kyle and Rebecca were excellent performers, and the squad couldn't wait to be lauded as the team with the best performers at the festival. Rebecca and Kyle waited in the wings while the master of ceremonies introduced them. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, I am honored to welcome 2 soldiers from the airborne squad onto the stage. They'll be dancing a waltz for us tonight. Please give a loud applause for Captain Gonzalez and Officer Davis. The auditorium darkened, and after a few seconds, a single spotlight lit up 2 figures on the stage. A tall, handsome man wearing a dress suit decorated with insignias and shiny badges was holding a beautiful woman in his arms. Her white dress shimmered in the light, and she seemed ethereal with her delicate features and large almond-shaped eyes. The audience applauded loudly, and some of the soldiers in Rebecca's squad whistled. The music started, and Kyle gently led Rebecca across the stage. They swayed in perfect timing to the rhythm of the music, and Rebecca's dress swirled as Kyle spun her out and back into his arms. Their movements were graceful, and their figures created the perfect balance of rugged masculinity and soft femininity. The audience watched in awe as the dancers twirled across the stage. It wasn't the first time Rebecca had danced with Kyle. She was also the Davis family princess and had danced many waltzes. But as she held onto Kyle's hand and shoulder, she felt her heart grow heavier with each step. She watched the stage lights flicker on his face, highlighting his strong, chiseled jawline, and she saw his dark eyes locked onto her. She thought about what he had asked her about falling in love, and wondered if he considered falling in love now to be too soon for them. Her heart skipped a beat. What difference does it make if I don't wait until I'm 20? The tempo of the music began to speed up, and Kyle held Rebecca tighter as they spun around the stage. He led her by the hand, and they moved in perfect unison, swaying in time to the rhythm of the music. Their eyes locked, and they whirled with their shoulders parallel and back straight. Their feet moved lightly as they effortlessly and gracefully floated across the stage. The audience gasped as they watched the dancers spin and twirl faster. It was exhilarating, and they were utterly absorbed in the moment. Rebecca's dress shimmered in the light as Kyle spun her around. Her feet lifted off the stage floor, and her skirt billowed, revealing her long, slender legs. She smiled and kept her gaze on Kyle's eyes, never breaking away. She focused on him and nothing else. The music began to slow down, and Kyle pulled her closer as their footsteps slowed and they gradually stopped. The audience burst into a thunderous applause. The airborne squad whistled and cheered loudly. Rebecca and Kyle bowed and hurried backstage to prepare for their next performance. Rebecca's cheeks were flushed, and her eyes sparkled as she smiled. A stagehand passed her a bottle of water, and she took a large gulp, realizing that Kyle still had his arms around her. The Master of Ceremonies introduced the next item of the program, which was just long enough for Rebecca and Kyle to catch their breaths before their piano recital began. They didn't have enough time to change outfits. Instead, Rebecca touched up her makeup, and Kyle wiped the sweat off his brow. The audience applauded excitedly as they walked back on stage and sat beside each other at a shiny grand piano. Rebecca had thought she would keep a low profile at the military base, but she soon realized that everyone would know of her because of the concert. A warm spotlight lit up the piano and the two players as they began to play the piece of music that they had rehearsed several times. Rebecca watched Kyle's nimble fingers spread across the keys, and she wondered how such calloused and scarred hands could be so strong, yet so gentle. Kyle had noticed how she had stared at his hands, and he gave her a cheeky grin when they had finished their performance and were standing backstage. "It seems you like my hands more than me." Rebecca was stunned and snorted. "Yeah, something like that." Kyle took her hand and laughed as he led her back to the auditorium. "Then my hands belong to you." The rows were almost empty because the next group of performers were backstage getting ready for their item, so Rebecca and Kyle sat by themselves. One of the soldiers patted Kyle on the back as he passed them and congratulated him on a stellar performance. "Hey, Captain Gonzalez, you and Officer Davis were amazing." Kyle chuckled. "Thanks. I'll see you on stage soon. Don't mess it up." The soldier grinned. "Yeah, we're going to be a hit." After a short interval, Rebecca and Kyle returned backstage to prepare for their third performance. Kyle played the part of an army general on the front lines in a war, and Rebecca played his wife. The scene started with a few lines of dialogue that would be followed by a chorus and then a duet. It was a touching story about love and longing. Rebecca hadn't felt a connection with Kyle while they had been rehearsing, but under the bright stage lights, their emotions seemed natural, as if she were pining for her love on the battlefield. The intensity of the moment left her feeling out of sorts. Their scene ended, and they exited the stage while the chorus sang. The stage lights dimmed, and they returned to the stage to sing their duet. The audience applauded and cheered. Rebecca and Kyle hadn't rehearsed the duet together, and it was the first time she had heard him sing. His deep, rich baritone voice carried effortlessly over the music. Although he didn't have exceptional skill, the timbre of his voice was intoxicating. Rebecca listened to him sing and felt herself become lost in the melody. She took a deep breath and began singing her part of the duet. She had a beautiful, clear, mezzo-soprano voice, and the highest notes sounded angelic as she smoothly glided from one note to the next. Their vocal styles complemented each other perfectly, and they harmonized beautifully. Kyle glanced at her occasionally and wanted to reach out to hold her hand. Their duet ended, and the audience jumped to their feet, roaring and clapping wildly as Rebecca and Kyle bowed, beaming from ear to ear. The house lights lit up, and it was time for a brief intermission before the next performance. A pretty female soldier approached the stage with a bouquet of flowers. She smiled coyly and held the bouquet out to Kyle. Kyle nodded politely, took the bouquet from the female soldier, and handed it to Rebecca. He also reached out and took another bouquet that a young soldier had been holding out for her. He nodded to the soldier and promptly gave the flowers to Rebecca. She clutched the 2 bouquets in her arms and stared at Kyle in amazement. She couldn't believe he could get so jealous. Several more soldiers approached to congratulate her, but Kyle stood guard over her and impolitely turned them away. After intermission, Rebecca and Kyle joined the final item on the program. It was a choral arrangement, and Rebecca stood in the first row while Kyle stood in the back row because he was one of the tallest men. The men sang loudly, and Rebecca felt her eardrums would burst. Their deep voices echoed through the auditorium, mesmerizing the audience. The audience again burst out in applause and cheers when the song ended. The evening's event was over, and soldiers who weren't on duty were allowed to leave the base for the weekend. Relieved, but still feeling the exhilaration of performing to an adoring audience, Rebecca returned to her room to get changed. She took off her dress and wiped the makeup off her face. She changed into casual clothes and packed a small bag for her weekend at home. She was about to leave when she heard a soft knock on her door. She found Kyle waiting for her outside. He had changed from his dress suit into jeans and a warm pullover. He looked relaxed and smiled at her lazily. "It's still early. Would you like to go out for dinner?" He took her bag and pulled her hoodie over her head. Rebecca wasn't tired yet. The thrill of being on stage had energized her, and she felt ravenous. So she nodded, and they walked toward the dorm entrance. Just as they were about to leave the building and go to the parking lot, someone stopped them. "Captain Gonzalez!" Rebecca stopped and turned her head to see who it was. A female soldier, still dressed in her outfit from the performance, was beaming at Kyle. She was wearing a thick winter coat over her dress that wasn't long enough to cover her stocking legs and heels, and she looked freezing. She quickly walked up to Kyle. Kyle frowned slightly. "Is everything all right?" She smiled sweetly. "Yeah, I just wanted to congratulate you on your amazing performance." She glanced at Rebecca briefly and turned to Kyle again. "I was wondering if you were free tomorrow." Rebecca felt her chest tighten, realizing that it was the same soldier who had given Kyle flowers earlier. She was the one who had been openly flirting with Kyle at every opportunity she had. Rebecca side-eyed Kyle, curious to see how he would react. Kyle smiled politely. "I'm spending the day with my girlfriend tomorrow." The woman's expression froze, and she seemed speechless. Kyle maintained his calm composure. "Is there anything else?" The woman's eyes went wide, and her lips began to tremble. She looked at Rebecca, and then at Kyle. "Is this your girlfriend?" Kyle grinned and pulled Rebecca close. He put his hand around her waist and planted a kiss on her lips. Rebecca didn't have time to react and felt herself blushing. Kyle held on to her and looked the woman in the eyes. "Yeah." Visibly shocked, the woman gasped. Tears welled in her eyes, and she pushed the doors open and hurried away. Rebecca stood dead still and felt the warmth of Kyle's kiss on her lips. She watched the doors swing closed and saw snowflakes dancing in the air outside. Kyle let go of his grip around her waist. "Look, Becky, it's snowing." She nodded, and her eyes glistened. Kyle took her hand and led her into the parking lot. Like a child, he laughed and stuck his tongue out to catch a snowflake. "I'm having snow for dinner tonight." Rebecca laughed and waited for him to open the car door for her. He helped her in and leaned over to fasten her seatbelt. As he clicked it in place, Rebecca looked at him curiously. "Don't you think you hurt that woman's feelings just now?" Kyle's actions had surprised her, and she didn't blame the woman for being so upset. It was evident that he meant what he had said. He shook his head. "I don't care for her. I've hinted more than once that I'm not interested, and I've even told her that I have a girlfriend, but she refused to believe me." Rebecca blinked but didn't say anything. Kyle closed her door and hurried to the driver's side. He started the car and looked at her as he waited for the engine to warm up. "She won't bother me again. I'm certain of that. Besides, I had to draw a line in case my future girlfriend gets jealous." Rebecca stared at him and couldn't believe his audacity. She wondered what made him think she would get jealous, and she also hadn't confirmed that she was willing to be his girlfriend. Although she very much wanted to, his assumption irked her. They had never been out in New York together. He drove them to an upmarket revolving restaurant renowned for its view of the city. He had already reserved a table, and they took the elevator to the top floor of the tall skyscraper. The maitre d' led them across the main dining area to a private room with floor-to-ceiling windows. The panoramic view was breathtaking, and Rebecca stared out at the cityscape below in awe. She smiled and turned to Kyle. "Do your friends know you're so extravagant?" The restaurant was expensive, and every item on the menu cost more than average. Kyle chuckled as he placed their order. "They don't need to know. I'll only ever bring my princess here." Rebecca felt he was trying too hard to impress her with words he didn't usually use. She grinned and teased him. "Your princess? I've never heard you talk like that before." He winked at her. "You still need to learn a lot more about me. Ask me anything and I'll tell you." He held up his glass to clink against hers. She lifted her glass and pouted. "I don't think I should." Kyle knew she was teasing him, and he changed the subject. After taking a sip of his drink, his expression became serious. "The meeting I had today before the festival was a briefing about a new mission. We're going to support a rescue effort in Ecuador. There's been a volcanic eruption, and many civilians are trapped in their villages. We leave in the next few days." Rebecca's face lit up. "Can I go with?" Kyle nodded. "Yeah, I think you're ready. But just be warned, it's a dangerous operation, and it's imperative that you listen to my every instruction. You can't rush off on your own." Rebecca nodded. "I understand. Will I still be in charge of aircraft maintenance?" "Yeah. You'll be based at our operations camp and will remain there unless we need additional support in the field." Rebecca's eyes sparkled with anticipation, and she nodded eagerly. Kyle continued. "I'll brief the squad the day after tomorrow, and you'll know which tasks you'll be assigned. We'll move out in the afternoon, as it's a long flight." Rebecca watched the snowflakes float toward them. They glistened and sparkled in the city lights, and she suddenly thought of something. "I can't remember when last I built a snowman." Kyle's face lit up as he had an idea. "We should build one tomorrow. I think there's going to be a heavy snowfall during the night. We can go to a nearby park." She smiled when she saw the enthusiasm in his eyes. "It'll be so much fun. I want to build an enormous snowman." Their order arrived, and they realized just how starving they were after the evening's performances. They ate and chatted, and content in one another's company. Because Rebecca had been training in the desert for so many years, seeing fresh snowfall awoke her inner child. After dinner, she rushed into the parking lot and stomped into the thick banks of snow that had gathered on the ground. Kyle watched her, surprised to see her so carefree and happy. She smiled, as if her sadness over Callum's disappearance had finally left her. He didn't want to spoil the moment by taking her home, so he gestured to a park at the far end of the parking lot. "Do you want to go for a walk before I take you home?" She nodded and hooked her arm into his as they walked toward the park. The park was deserted, and the snowfall was fresh. It shimmered in the dim lights, making the night seem magical. In the silence of the falling snow, Rebecca looked down and noticed Kyle's footprints. His feet were much larger than hers, reminding her of a bear. "It looks like there's a bear in the park tonight." Kyle laughed and spread his arms wide. He took giant strides and growled at her. "Watch out. Here comes the bear. And he's hungry." Rebecca squealed and ran away from him, laughing with delight. Kyle chased her around a tree and past a frozen pond until she was breathless. She unwrapped her scarf and laughed. "I'm getting so hot." Under the dim lights, her rosy cheeks glowed and her eyes twinkled. Her hair was wrapped around her long, slender neck, and she was glowing. Kyle looked at her with desire and took a deep breath. Rebecca pretended not to notice and fanned her face to cool down. She smiled and giggled. "Captain Gonzalez, the big bear." Kyle stepped closer and took her by the waist. He pulled her body against his and lowered his head to kiss her. The previous times Kyle had kissed Rebecca were restrained. and he had only lightly pecked her on the lips. But that evening in the park, with snowflakes drifting down from the thick clouds above, Kyle embraced Rebecca with a longing and desire that took her breath away. Her mind went blank as she leaned into him. Then, her senses exploded, and the touch of his lips pressing against her made her entire body tingle. The warmth of his breath burned against her cold cheeks, and she felt his grip around her waist tighten. She wanted to push him away, but he held on to her and kissed her with more intensity, as if he wanted their bodies to merge into one. Rebecca's palms began to sweat, and she grabbed his shirt collar, her heart beating like a drum. She forgot about the world around them as the sweet taste of his lips against hers flooded her senses. Her knees felt weak. She felt afraid, but safe at the same time. Kyle embraced her for a long time, and Rebecca surrendered to him. Her chaotic thoughts dissipated as she savored the moment. Eventually, he slowly let go of her and pulled his lips away. Their foreheads touched, and the condensation of their warm breaths in the cold air swirled around them. Their chests heaved up and down as they caught their breaths. Kyle lowered his eyes to look at her. Rebecca didn't speak. She tried to think of something to say, but words escaped her. Instead, she looked up at him with sparkling eyes and smiled. He looked at her and sighed. Then he tilted her head to kiss her again. He held her tighter than previously, and she felt his heart beating in his chest. Their lips touched, and Kyle kissed her with more passion and desire than before. Rebecca's body went weak, and she grabbed onto him for support. He wrapped his arms tighter around her and held on to her slender frame. Rebecca didn't notice the snowflakes falling around them. She breathed in the sweet scent of his cologne and felt his fingers running through her hair. He pulled away from her again and breathed heavily. They stood in the dim light as snowflakes swirled onto the ground beneath their feet, covering up their footprints. Kyle hugged her as if he never wanted to let go. Rebecca leaned against his chest and listened to his beating heart. She felt his breath's rhythmic rise and fall, and she sighed. He softened his hold around her waist. "Are you getting cold?" She shook her head. The magic of the moment had ended, and she suddenly didn't know how to feel. Just a few hours earlier, she had decided to tell him she was ready to fall in love with him. But now they had kissed, and everything had changed. Kyle took her scarf and shook the snow off. He wrapped it around her neck and tucked her hair behind her ears. She was usually fiercely independent, but allowed Kyle to take the lead. Her heart swelled with happiness, and she tingled all over. Kyle gazed at her and wanted nothing more than to kiss her again, but he restrained himself. She was still young, and he worried he would lose self-control if he continued to kiss her. She was pure, like the white snowflakes drifting in the air around them. Their future was long, and he didn't want to ruin it. Kyle held Rebecca's hand and slowly led her out of the park. He brushed the snowflakes off her hair and smiled. "It's late. I'd better get you home now. I'll pick you up tomorrow and we can build a snowman." Rebecca bit her lip and gazed into his eyes as she nodded. Kyle opened the car door and helped her get in. He walked around the car, whistling happily. As he started the engine, he glanced at Rebecca, who was staring out the window. Although it was freezing cold, he felt warmth in his heart. "Becky, I want you to know that your first kiss was also mine. I promise to cherish it forever." Rebecca ignored him, not sure of how to answer. She was still too stunned to speak. He smiled and ruffled her hair to stop himself from kissing her again. The softness of her lips and the sweet taste of her mouth were addictive. He longed to kiss her again and again. He wanted to hold her in his arms and never let her go. Every inch of his body ached for her. He took a deep breath and exhaled slowly as he exited the parking lot and drove her home. Rebecca had told Nancy and Jonathan that she would be home for the night after the Mid-Autumn Festival show, and as they approached her house, she had to force herself to calm down. The sensation of Kyle's lips against hers lingered, and her heart skipped a beat as she remembered the intense passion of his embrace. She felt her body tingle as she recounted the first kiss, and then the second. Rebecca stared at the lights of the passing cars and sighed. She knew it was time she admitted that she had fallen head over heels in love with Kyle. She tried remembering when she had first become aware of her feelings for him. She thought back to when he had taught her how to fly, when she had treated his eyes, or even when he had been her instructor in the Air Force Academy and had helped her get ahead of her peers. She recalled him spinning her across the stage and the exhilarating feeling of being in his arms. Kyle had always treated her differently than anyone else, ever since she could remember, and she had never been interested in any other boy, even though many of them had declared their love for her. She had never felt bad for rejecting their advances because her heart had already belonged to Kyle. She had also only told him that she didn't want to be distracted by a relationship, not that she wasn't interested in him. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that it had been obvious that they had feelings for one another. She had deliberately not given it any attention and had chosen to focus on her training instead. If she had been less determined to come across as tough and confident, she would have been more attentive to how she had reacted each time he had shown her affection. He had been trying to tell her for a long time that he had liked her. She realized she had tried to ignore her feelings, although they had always been there. When he had gifted her the bracelet, her body had trembled as he had fastened it around her delicate wrist. Her heart had skipped a beat each time he had told her he would wait for her. She had always liked him, just as he had always liked her. Rebecca felt her heart leap in her throat as the realization finally dawned on her. She smiled and turned to look at Kyle. Kyle noticed her gaze from the corner of his eye, and his lips curled into a soft smile. "My Becky." She smiled coyly and looked away. Kyle ruffled her hair once more and chuckled. "Your hair is in a bit of a state. You should probably tidy it up before we get to your house. Otherwise, your parents might suspect that I did something to you, and your father will want to break my legs." The charming feeling of being kissed by Kyle disappeared in an instant. She flipped the sun visor down and looked at herself in the tiny mirror. Her sunny mood darkened, and she glared at him. She looked a mess. Kyle's mouth twitched as he saw her frown. He wanted to laugh and ruffle her hair again, but didn't want to push his luck. Instead, he focused on the road and enjoyed the joy and contentedness she had brought him. Kyle pulled up outside Rebecca's house and leaned over to open the door for her. "You go in. It's late. I don't want to disturb your parents. Tell them I'll see them in the morning." Rebecca nodded. "Good night. Sweet dreams." He smiled. "Good night, my sweet Becky." Rebecca was sleeping so well that she overslept and woke up to discover that it was already past 9 o'clock in the morning. She had struggled to fall asleep, thinking about Kyle and their kiss in the snowy park. She yawned and stretched to reach her phone on her bedside table. The envelope icon blinked, indicating a new, unread message. She sat up and quickly opened the message. It was from Kyle. "Becky, the mission has been moved ahead of schedule. We leave tomorrow. I'll pick you up this afternoon. Pack your summer fatigues. We'll be going to Ecuador. It's hot and humid there." Rebecca jumped out of bed and started packing. She spent the morning with her parents and waited for Kyle to pick her up after lunch. The combat rescue and search squadron stood ready on the helipads as the soldiers loaded their gear. Rebecca, Kyle, and about 30 other airborne soldiers boarded the helicopters and flew away in a tight formation toward Ecuador to join an international team of rescuers. In a dimly lit basement, a young man was wearing a pair of shorts and a tight vest. He held his clenched fists against his chest, ready to throw the next punch. A group of boxers ganged up on a young man, trying to hit him in the stomach and the head, but he expertly dodged their punches and lashed out at them with all his strength, targeting their weak spots. His opponents were forced to move back. He soon knocked them out one by one, and they lay on the ground, moaning in pain. The man wiped the blood from his lips, smiling wickedly at them. "Well done," he heard a voice behind him say. He whipped around, but he couldn't see the other man's face because he was standing in the shadows. The young man shrugged and removed his shirt, which was covered in sweat and blood. He had wide shoulders and strong, rippling muscles. He wasn't even feeling tired after having fought off so many men. He was psyched by the fight and was ready for more. His body was covered in scars, but they didn't detract from his looks. Instead, they made him look more attractive. He had strong, perfectly shaped legs that could make women swoon. There was something not quite human, almost animalistic, about his physique and his demeanor. "You've completed your rehabilitation and training," the man behind him announced. "It's time for you to go on a mission. You may run into old friends and past acquaintances there, but you must remember to follow orders. Otherwise, I'll kill you. Do you understand?" The young man nodded. "Yeah, I get it." His captor, who was wearing a long black cloak, emerged from the shadows and handed him some documents. "These are proofs of your identity. Remember, your name is Chester." The man scowled, looking at the documents. "I really don't think Chester suits me. Are you sure that's my name?" "I told you many times now that when we found you, we found your ID. And that's the name that was on it. Besides, what difference does it make? It's just a name. Keep those documents with you at all times." Chester nodded. He was about to ask about his mission when he suddenly broke out in a cold sweat. He covered his face with his hands as he felt a throbbing pain in his head. He groaned like a desperate beast about to be strangled, and when he tried to speak, no words came out. He fell to the ground and started shaking uncontrollably. The man in the cloak stood there watching him quietly, unmoved by his struggles. After a while, Chester stopped trembling. He slowly pulled himself to his feet, confused. "Did you have another one of your spasms?" the cloaked man asked. Chester raised his head. "I think so." "How do you feel?" "Better, I guess. I get throbbing headaches sometimes." The man nodded. "That's understandable. You haven't fully recovered from your injuries yet. You can expect spasms now and then. Just remember to exercise regularly and get plenty of rest. It's time for you to get out of here. It'll do you good." Chester looked at him quizzically. "What would you like me to do on this mission?" "You'll be going to Ecuador. There's a house there with some occupants. I need your help taking something from it." "Okay. When do I leave?" "Tomorrow. Take it easy for the rest of the day. Someone will come get you in the morning." He sent Chester back to his room in the basement. The cloaked man's assistant entered the room at that moment. "Sir, do you think he's ready?" "Yes. He leaves with Jimbo tomorrow. He should be able to complete the mission in 2 weeks. After that, I don't care whether his memory returns or not." "But will he succeed? He's only been training for 6 months." The cloaked man snorted. "I should hope so. He's Jonathan's son. He's a talented race car driver, he can fight, and he knows how to shoot a rifle." His assistant shook his head. "Even so, he's been through a lot. What if he's not as smart as you think he is?" "I don't need him to be smart. I need him to follow orders. When faced with danger, he'll reach his full potential. He'll fight to the death. Even though he's lost his memory and we control his mind, his instincts are still intact. Once he sees blood, he'll know what to do. Just wait and see." "Okay, sir. In that case, I'll go and prepare everything we need." If Tristan had seen his twin brother then, he would never have recognized him. Callum looked nothing like him anymore. The following morning, Callum, whose new name was Chester, got dressed and followed Jimbo out to the car. They got in and headed to the airport. As they stopped at a traffic light, a cutting-edge camera that the Davis Group had developed, the Smart Private Eye, took a picture of Callum's face and sent it to the central database of the company's headquarters. By the time the traffic light turned green, the AI system had already begun to compare Callum's facial features with tens of millions of other pictures in the database. However, because Callum's face had changed so much, the system couldn't produce any matches, so he was simply recorded as a new piece of data with the time and place that the picture had been captured. It was as if Callum had never existed before, and he had suddenly appeared out of nowhere. Luckily, Jonathan had taken that possibility into account when he developed the system, and non-matched cases were sent to a separate, specialized department of the Davis Group for analysis. The technologists there would then compare similar records and evaluate whether they were close enough for a match. The smart private eye was the result of years of research. The company had never publicized its technology, however, so it was used for special investigations and covert search operations. The technical staff at the Davis Group was already analyzing the photo of Callum when Callum and Jimbo arrived at a private airport and boarded a plane that went to Houston. From there, the two men caught a connecting flight to Quito, Ecuador, where they landed 5 hours later. Rebecca, Kyle, and the rest of their squad met up with the United Nations rescue team. An active volcano had recently erupted in Ecuador's central area, spewing lava everywhere. An earthquake had followed, trapping the inhabitants of 2 nearby towns. Communication had been cut off, so the teams were in charge of searching for survivors in the area. They had to move quickly, since anyone trapped underneath the rubble wouldn't last for more than 1 or 2 days. After arriving in Quito, the group headed straight to the site. It was there that they discovered the full extent of the devastation in Ambato, the town closest to the earthquake's epicenter. Rebecca and Kyle were shocked. Although they had witnessed the hurricane's damage in Martinique, it was nothing compared to what awaited them in Ecuador. Rebecca had seen pictures of Ambato before. It was a lovely town surrounded by mountains, and it had many historical buildings. It had a rich, vibrant culture, a stunning cathedral, and beautiful gardens. The earthquake and the volcano had almost completely destroyed it, however. Its inhabitants stood wailing among the ruins, searching for their loved ones. Kyle and Rebecca's squad was put in charge of the most devastated areas. Rescue helicopters had been sent to the scene to transport civilians to hospitals in nearby towns. Because Rebecca had little experience and lacked the strength to pull people out of the rubble, she assisted the team by using a portable instrument to detect signs of life. Kyle had wanted her to stay at the operations camp, but they needed the additional support in the field. Rebecca ran around the ruins anxiously. She and the others hadn't had a moment's rest since they arrived in Ambato. It had been over 24 hours since the earthquake had occurred. She shuddered to think how many people were still trapped under the rubble. She had lost sight of Kyle hours ago. He was on the other side of the town, searching for victims. The instrument in her hand suddenly started flashing, indicating that someone was buried underneath the pile of concrete she was standing on. She waved her hand, signaling to the rescue team to join her. They quickly removed a heavy stone slab, revealing a woman curled up on the ground with her hand on her abdomen. She had dried blood on her face and in her hair. Rebecca was alarmed. "I think she's pregnant." One of the rescuers leaned over and examined her. "She's not breathing. I'm afraid she's gone." Rebecca watched in astonishment as they carefully pulled her out of the rubble. They were about to cover her with a white cloth when Rebecca shouted, "Wait!" She placed her hand on the woman's abdomen. She could feel a slight movement. "I think her baby's still alive. What do we do?" She checked the woman's pulse and shook her head in dismay. "She must have died a few minutes ago. We need to remove the baby immediately. Otherwise, it won't survive." She looked at the others. "Is there a doctor here who can perform a C-section?" A volunteer shook his head. "No, they're tending to other victims on the other side of town. The hospital was destroyed by the earthquake, and I don't know if there's any local medics around." Rebecca took a deep breath. "Does anyone have a scalpel and some disinfectant? Or alcohol and a lighter, perhaps?" Someone nodded. "I have a scalpel and a lighter. Are you planning on doing a C-section here?" "I have no choice. We can't wait for a helicopter to take the woman. The baby will be dead by the time they get to the hospital. This is the child's only chance." The rescue team was stunned. They thought she was too young to perform surgery, but they didn't say anything since they knew she was right. There weren't any other options. Rebecca took the scalpel and the lighter. She pointed to a large stone slab. "Let's place her on that flat surface over there." She sterilized the scalpel's blade with the lighter. She was so nervous that her hands were shaking. Though Helga had taught her a bit about traditional medicine, nothing had prepared her for something like that. All she knew was that she had to save the baby somehow. She took another deep breath to calm herself, and then she made an incision in the mother's abdomen. When the scalpel cut through the flesh, she had to stop for a moment to collect her wits. She could see the fetus moving inside. She knew the baby's heart rate was rapidly dropping from lack of oxygen. There was no more time to lose. She forced herself to pick up the scalpel again and continue the procedure. Rebecca grimaced as she performed the C-section. She was grateful that at least the deceased woman couldn't feel any pain. The members of the rescue team held their breaths as they watched her. She looked up at them. "I only need 2 of you to stay here and help me. The rest of you should go and continue to search. There may still be people trapped under the rubble." They nodded. A couple of them stayed behind while the others left. Rebecca felt around for the womb. She found it, and then she gently cut it open. She reached inside and touched a tiny foot. Her heart started pounding, and she felt an overwhelming sense of joy. She couldn't believe there was a living, breathing body inside. She knew she had to act quickly, though, so she carefully lifted the baby out. "It's a girl!" one of the volunteers next to her exclaimed, sighing with relief. "Thank goodness she's alive." Rebecca held the baby in her arms, wiping the grime from her face and body with her shirt. The umbilical cord was still attached to the placenta, so she asked the volunteer to cut it. She then tapped the baby on the back, and the little girl started crying at the top of her lungs. It was an emotional moment, and Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. "We need to give her some milk soon. Breast milk would be best, but I don't suppose we'll find any here. Actually, a woman further down lost her newborn in the earthquake," the other volunteer told Rebecca. "She's okay, though. Maybe she can feed the baby. Come with me." Rebecca nodded. She found a towel in her backpack, and she wrapped the child in it. She then turned to look at the body of the woman lying on the stone slab. "I'm sorry you lost your mother." She gently stroked the baby girl's head. "Say goodbye to her." They covered the woman with a white sheet as Rebecca followed the volunteer down the street. Kyle, who wasn't too far away, had witnessed the scene. Someone next to him was shouting something, but he didn't hear a thing. His eyes were glued to Rebecca and the baby. At that moment, he felt an overwhelming love for her. He had never met anyone so brave and caring. In addition to the countless survivors she had already helped, she had saved a tiny life. He didn't think he could be prouder. Rebecca and the volunteer arrived at another ravaged area, where a young woman was sobbing uncontrollably. The volunteer pointed to the baby in Rebecca's arms and asked the woman if she could breastfeed the baby, but the woman couldn't stop crying and calling out to her newborn, who had died underneath a pile of rocks. Just then, the little girl Rebecca was holding started wailing. The woman looked up, confused. Her gaze landed on the child. "My baby! You found her!" She got up somewhat unsteadily and walked over to them. She held out her arms. "It's okay. You can give her back to me now." Rebecca looked at her sympathetically, shaking her head. "I'm so sorry. Your baby's gone. This is someone else's." The young woman froze, looking at Rebecca with confusion. "That's my baby. Give her back to me." "No, she isn't. She was born a few minutes ago. Her mother just passed away." Rebecca remained patient. "Luckily, we were able to save her child. We don't know where the father is." The woman burst into tears. "My baby was only 3 days old when the earthquake hit. Our building collapsed. I couldn't save her. She was buried under the rubble. Oh, my poor baby. What am I going to do without her?" A volunteer put his arms around her. "I'm so sorry for your loss. I can't imagine what you're going through." Rebecca went up to the woman and showed her the newborn. "Do you think you can breastfeed her and hold her for a while? The poor thing must be missing her mother's warmth." The woman wiped the tears from her eyes. "She looks just like my little one did. My husband said we had the most beautiful baby in the world." Rebecca handed her the child. "Thank you so much for doing this. You're very kind." The woman sat on the ground and she lifted her shirt. There, little one. Don't cry. I'm going to give you some milk." She settled the baby in her lap and gave her her breast. The baby closed her eyes and began to suck on her nipple. Rebecca smiled with relief as she watched them. The baby drank for a while, and then she fell asleep. The woman hugged her tightly and rocked her back and forth. Rebecca could see the love in her eyes. She suggested they go seek shelter somewhere, but the woman was afraid they would take the baby from her. Rebecca knelt on the ground, trying to reassure her. "Come with us. You can take care of the baby while we search for her father. Perhaps he's around here somewhere. We have to find him." The woman nodded. She followed them to a large tent where the town's inhabitants were gathered. After saying goodbye to them, Rebecca left to join the rescue team again. They found a few more survivors, but all the doctors were busy. Rebecca did her best to treat the injured until they could be carried away by ambulances and helicopters. After her experiences in Mexico and Martinique, she felt more confident about her skills. She didn't even mind the sight of blood so much anymore. She tended to the wounded one by one, prioritizing the ones who needed immediate care. She didn't stop for the rest of the day. The sun finally sunk below the horizon, and it turned dark, making rescue efforts more difficult. Rebecca was exhausted. She hadn't slept for over 20 hours, and she found herself constantly yawning. She finished tending to an injured survivor, and then she stretched and looked around her. She asked a volunteer whether they had seen the airborne squad. "They went to another area to search for people trapped underneath a big building that collapsed. I think they found 10 survivors." Another volunteer, who was listening to their conversation, turned around excitedly. "One of the guys from the combat and rescue squad is amazing. I've never seen anyone fly a helicopter like that." Rebecca smiled because she knew he was referring to Kyle. She hoped that one day she would be able to master the skills he had. As she was thinking about him, the ground underneath them suddenly started to shake. Rebecca was shocked when the ground started shaking and had a premonition that something even worse was coming. It soon stopped, but it wasn't long before another vibration was felt. "Over here!" someone shouted. Everyone moved in that direction to tend to the newly discovered victims. The rescuers had had great difficulty digging the hole, and it was very likely that it would collapse again. There were still many people needing help inside. The message was relayed to the rescue personnel inside the cave-like structure. "I don't think we can go any further. Come out now." Rebecca was a little anxious because the shaking was getting more intense. She was finding it hard to stand on the continually moving ground. No one knew if it was an aftershock or a second earthquake. The previous earthquake had been measured at 8.5 on the Richter scale. The thought of another quake of a similar magnitude was of serious concern. Following the tremors, visible ripples in the earth appeared in front of Rebecca. A sound like a clap of thunder was heard by everyone. One of the rescuers crawled out of the cave with a wounded person in tow. The others raced to pull him and the injured party away from the entrance. As they were doing so, the ground shook violently again. It swept through like a wave underneath their feet, and they all fell to the ground. The vibrations lasted for almost a minute before they finally stopped. Rebecca looked around and saw scenes that she would never forget. The arm of the rescuer was still extended, and his hand was tightly clasped around the victims. The last shake had completely sealed the hole, and only half of the rescuer's hand was visible. The rest of him had been buried completely. Everything went silent until someone shouted and snapped them all out of it. "We need to dig! Quickly!" Everyone got to work, and Rebecca grabbed the nearest tool that she thought would be useful to help. What they found wasn't what any of them had been hoping for, and they looked on sadly. Many were beyond saving, and limbs had been broken and even severed. Rebecca tried to process what she was seeing. Although it wasn't the first time she had seen awful things, she fell to the ground and gasped for air. She was shocked and horrified. Those feelings turned to confusion as she saw a helicopter approaching through the dust that hadn't yet settled. Its rotor blades cut through the fading light, and she watched as it landed not far from her. She stood up as the pilot approached. Kyle didn't really need the camouflage he was wearing because he was covered in dirt and mud as he strode toward Rebecca. The ground was still shaking slightly, and the cracking sounds continued at varying intervals, but she wasn't sure of anything but him. He stopped in front of her and pulled her into his arms. She could smell sweat and soil mixed with the faint smell of blood on his body, but she didn't find it unpleasant. Instead, his very presence put her at ease. Nausea arose as she thought about what she had just seen. So many people just died. Yes, I know. He hugged her tightly. His heart rate, which had been fueled by adrenaline, finally slowed. The aftershock had been a magnitude 7. He hadn't been able to see her, and his fear had been uncontrollable. Rain's forecast overnight. If it's heavy, it might cause a mudslide. He said, "You're in a residential area, so don't go anywhere. If there's danger, I'll know where to find you." Rebecca nodded. "What about you?" "I'm in charge of transporting the seriously injured. Don't worry if you can't find me. Just stay with the group and leave." She nodded again and grabbed his arm. "Tell me you'll be okay." "I will be." He had landed there to pick up more injured people, so after reassuring Rebecca, he had to leave again quickly. Rebecca was reluctant to let Kyle go, and she looked at him with wet eyes. She couldn't ask him to stay, but she hoped he would know what she was feeling. He bent and kissed her dirt-streaked hair. "I have to go now." She nodded sadly and watched him leave. Due to the strong aftershock, the rescuers, who had just begun to have some hope, once again found themselves in a difficult situation. With the added possibility of an incoming thunderstorm, time was of the essence. The helicopters that had been dispatched started to move civilians, and Rebecca stayed to help the wounded. The sky was getting darker by the second, and the night made the rescue even harder. Rebecca was so tired that she couldn't even lift her arms. She had just helped to transfer a patient when a flash of light suddenly lit up the sky. She looked up, and it wasn't long before it was followed by muffled thunder. The storm wasn't far away. The urgent cries started. "Oh no, it's really going to rain! We just need to hold on for a few more hours." They tried to encourage each other and raise spirits as they started the race against time. The rain soon began to fall, and Rebecca and her team were quickly drenched. Fortunately, it wasn't cold, and they had waterproof gear to wear, so it wasn't as bad as it could have been. They were operating with a system that was a bit like a conveyor belt. The people were rescued, carried to a flat area, triaged, and moved to the helicopter. The rain grew heavier. There were many places that had already started to accumulate water, which made the evacuation work even more difficult. It was another sleepless night, and as dawn approached, Rebecca heard a message being broadcast through her radio. "Attention everyone! There's been a landslide 5 miles from the city, and it's caused a large amount of flooding. The water and debris will likely be heading this way, so we must evacuate immediately." Rebecca was startled and quickly looked toward the sky. More helicopters were arriving to help with the mass evacuation, so those on the ground began to organize the remaining people. Rebecca quickly bandaged her patient, who had just been rescued. The rain poured down on his face. It must have awoken something in him, because he suddenly grabbed her arm and looked at her anxiously. "My wife and mother are still inside. Please save them." The man was strong, and he was hurting her. She asked him to let go of her before agreeing to organize someone to keep looking. The man realized what he was doing and quickly released her. "Sorry." Rebecca started checking to see if he had any other injuries, but he stopped her. "I'm okay. They need the help more than me." At that moment, a helicopter came overhead. She recognized the pilot as a man named Lee. Once landed, he jumped down from the helicopter and spoke to anyone who was listening. "Gather as many as you can. We'll be taking off again in 5 minutes." The man that Rebecca was helping couldn't contain himself when he heard that. He pushed her hands aside and moved as quickly as he could to the closest rescuer. "Please don't give up on my family. They're still alive. They can't be left behind." The rescuers exchanged glances. "Where are they?" "I was upstairs. They were downstairs in the kitchen." Rebecca's heart sank when she heard that. The 2-story building that he was talking about had completely collapsed. He had been buried in the ruins of the 2nd floor, so she didn't hold out much hope for the family members that had been below him. Another flash of lightning lit up everything. It was obvious that the man's face wasn't only wet from the rain. It gave all of them the impetus to dig deep and carry on. Okay, let's get down there and see who we can find. Many people had already started queuing up to board the helicopters. Some of them heard a faint roaring sound in the distance, which sent shockwaves rippling through the crowd. Rebecca was jolted into action when she heard it and quickly helped the man up. She asked the nearest rescuer to help transfer him to the chopper. The man shook his head. I want to wait for them. He stared intently at the hole that the team looking for his family had gone down. He had no intention of cooperating with the evacuation. Lee was in a dilemma. Rebecca, you need to get on board too. Kyle specifically asked me to pick you up. She nodded and looked back at the man. Are you going or not? The man didn't move and refused the offer of help to board. He wasn't going anywhere without his wife and mother and would rather die with them. His refusal made her angry because she knew the effort that the rescue personnel had gone through to save him. One of her colleagues had almost been smashed by a stone slab that had fallen down, and she couldn't bear to see how little value he placed on his own life after all the work that had been done to save it. She quickly moved behind him and pressed firmly on a pressure point that she knew would render him unconscious. He didn't even have time to make a sound before he collapsed. Rebecca moved away from the unconscious man. You guys have to lift him into the helicopter. Lee was stunned by her actions. She was in the Air Force, but because she was young and beautiful, she was often treated as a fragile princess. She had inadvertently enhanced that image when she had gone on stage to perform with Kyle in her beautiful white dress. At that moment, her hair was short, wet, and stuck to her face randomly. She had the bottom of her pants rolled up to avoid the mud that she was covered in. She was coated with blood of the wounded and looked like a completely different person from the overtly feminine character she had played on stage. She had also dropped a man with one push of her thumb. While others were using all sorts of gently persuasive techniques to get people on board the helicopter, she had just taken complete physical control of a person who was resisting. Lee had heard a few of their colleagues say that Rebecca was dating Kyle. He laughed at the idea because he didn't think that Kyle was the one to be taken in by feminine wiles alone. But he had just seen that she wasn't one to use them at all. He watched as she went to deal with another of the wounded. She didn't even stop to push her hair off her face, and Lee decided that she was exactly the kind of person to suit his captain. 5 minutes went by very quickly, and there was still no sign of the group looking for the man's family. Rebecca had finished bandaging her 2 new patients, so she went back to the hole that the rescuers had disappeared through and shouted for them. There was no response. Lee was also a little anxious. He was about to say something when he heard the indistinct roaring sound from earlier getting louder. It had reached the point where it could be heard clearly over the noisy rain, and in his mind, it sounded like destruction. Rebecca was shocked. The flood's coming. Lee was thinking the same thing. Get in the chopper, quickly. Rebecca knew that there was no sense in staying behind. She nodded and tried again to warn those still underground over the radio. Having done her best, she quickly jumped into the helicopter. Lee had also climbed aboard, and he prepared for takeoff. Below them, the rescuers had found the trapped wife and mother they had been looking for, and they were huddled in a triangular safe zone. They were all still alive. There had been a great sense of relief, and one of them was building a temporary support for the passageway when the message came through. What did they say? One of them asked. It's a warning. They're leaving. Is the flood here? We need to move quickly. Let's go! On the ground, the helicopter blades were already rotating. Rebecca saw something in the distance heading their way, but it didn't look like water. It looked more like a cyclone coming toward them, and her heart constricted. I can't wait any longer, Lee said, and he started to open the throttle. As he did so, Rebecca saw someone emerge from the hole. Wait, Lee, they're out! Everyone watched, aghast, as the 2 women and their rescuers squeezed out. It was just in time, because they could all hear the flood approaching, and they knew that its momentum would be unstoppable. They managed to get them onto the helicopter just as the deluge of water came into sight. Lee pulled up and took off for safety. Everyone in the helicopter saw the floodwaters rush over the ground that they had been standing on only moments before. The city, which had already been in ruins, was covered in water and silt and was gone in an instant. So many years of history and culture had been buried under the surging torrent and destroyed in a second. The buildings had withstood so many years of wind and rain, but hadn't been able to cope with an earthquake of that magnitude. They knew that there were also people who hadn't been able to get help in time that were buried along with the buildings. It had only been 48 hours since the volcanic eruption that had caused it all, and there had been so much devastation since. The helicopter flew low to cut through the wind and rain. Rebecca was able to see everything below them. The flood had turned the city into a vast ocean, and she knew that it would forever remain in the darkness. After half an hour of flying, they arrived at another city. It was situated in the middle of Ecuador and had the largest refugee settlement. It was exceptionally noisy, even at dawn. The helicopter stopped, and the wounded were transferred to the hospital. It was already packed, so many people were left to wait in the hall. Rebecca saw many of her fellow workers in the hall. Some of them had slight injuries, and some were still bleeding, so she went straight over to help them. There were no spare beds, and the wounded kept coming by the helicopter load, so many people got as comfortable as they could and slept on the floor. Rebecca continued to busy herself with treating the wounded. Lee stood with one of the other pilots and watched her tending to the patients. He sighed. "She's amazing. She can handle anything." The other pilot looked around. "Where's the captain? He hasn't returned yet." "I heard that he's on the other side of the city. Apparently, moved some very important cultural relic that they managed to save." While they were chatting, they were filling up on bread and water, as neither of them had eaten much that day. Rebecca was handed some as well, and as she took the bread, she looked regretfully at her filthy hands. She wolfed it all down and instantly felt herself recharging. She then noticed the others standing close by. "Where's Kyle?" "He should be back soon." The conversation triggered a memory in one of the soldiers. He stood up suddenly, his face pale. Rebecca's heart sank. "What is it?" "We were so busy moving the wounded that we left the refueling of the other aircraft for later." He was visibly shaking with emotion as he spoke. "In the push to leave following the arrival of the flood, we forgot to do it." Her eyes widened. "So he didn't leave when you did? And his chopper doesn't have much fuel?" The soldier nodded. His face was full of pain and regret. "We planned to refuel, but I've just realized that we didn't do it." She felt a chill rise from the soles of her feet, and it slowly spread through her entire body. "How much fuel does it still have? How far can it fly?" "Only a small amount. I don't think it will get him far enough to escape the flood." She didn't say anything more and turned to leave. Lee called after her, and the others followed quickly in her footsteps. Rebecca heard the crowd behind her. "You guys are needed here. I'll bring him back." It was the first time that any of them had seen her take control so completely. They all believed that she could do what she said, so no one insisted that she stay. There were a lot of helicopters parked in the hospital, and while it was raining, it wasn't anywhere near as heavy as where they had come from. Rebecca had the appropriate documentation and access to a helicopter because she had been assigned one when she had arrived. She hadn't used it to that point, but she decided that it was the right time. After checking the gas meter, she entered her route into the navigation system. She wasn't thinking about anything but her mission, and the concentration showed on her face. To appear calm and collected, and to remain focused, she buried her anxiety. She opened the throttle and slowly rose into the air. She gripped the flight controller tightly and forced herself to move steadily. She remembered a story that Kyle had once told her about a pilot. His plane had been about to run out of fuel, but he had successfully used the laws of physics to control the downdraft and lessen the impact of a forced landing. He had landed safely. She believed that Kyle could do it too, but she desperately wanted to find him. Because of the earthquake, all communications in the area had been cut off. Rebecca, though, was wearing the bracelet that he had given her, and it showed his location. It indicated that his position hadn't changed for some time. She flew through the rain. It was the first time she had flown in such a big storm, and it was different from any of the simulations that she had done. The rain was soon very heavy, and she was quickly out of sight of those on the ground. She kept her eyes fixed on the radar because she was flying at such a low altitude. As she got closer to the city, she sucked in a breath because all she could see was a sea of mud and floating objects. Dawn had arrived, and she could see remarkably clearly through the rain. She tried to find a place to land as she thought about how she would find Kyle and what he might be doing. Suddenly, she saw something big and black ahead of her about 5 yards above the water's surface. It made quite a sight, and as she flew closer, she was very surprised by what she saw. The black thing was part of a collapsed building that must have been a couple of stories tall when it had still been standing. Half of it was still submerged in the water, but the other half was slanted out of the water as it balanced on some sort of fulcrum. At that moment, Rebecca fully believed in karma, and that you got back from the world what you put into it. Kyle had done a lot of good, and the world had saved him. His helicopter was resting on the fallen wall, which was just strong enough to withstand the weight of a small aircraft. Rebecca figured that he had used the piece of the building to slow his downward momentum and was precariously balanced on one end. She could tell that it was carefully positioned and that any moment could cause his chopper to fall. She thought about how level-headed he must have been to have pulled something like that off. She slowly lowered her altitude, opened the cabin door, and dropped the ladder. She very carefully approached him. She could see Kyle watching her with a smile. He was looking at her with admiration and thinking about how far she had come from the little girl that he had had to carry on his back. Kyle opened the door of his helicopter as Rebecca approached. The backpack carrying the relics was slung on his shoulder. He hung on for dear life as his helicopter teetered on the huge cement pillar, swaying in the relentless wind and rain. He leaned out and reached for the rope ladder Rebecca had flung down. He then got out, quickly removed the heavy rope around his wrist, and skillfully tied it around his helicopter's propeller. He wasn't just going to let his helicopter be swept away in the flood. The ropes were strong and could hold the weight of a small aircraft. Rebecca watched him from the cockpit, holding her breath. She had hoped he would just climb the ladder, but she didn't dare question his actions. He was an expert pilot who knew what he was doing. She tried to keep her helicopter as steady as possible as Kyle finally jumped onto the rope ladder and climbed up. She breathed a sigh of relief when he was safely inside. He pulled the ladder up and then closed the door. Not wasting any time talking, Kyle focused his attention on the ground below while she maneuvered the helicopter. His helicopter lifted off the cement slab, and suddenly, the pillar gave way and crashed into the water. Kyle groaned as he watched it sink beneath the surface. "So long. Thanks for saving my life." He then went over to the cockpit to see how Rebecca was doing. She was calm and collected, and she gave him a quick smile before turning her attention back to the control dashboard. It wasn't easy pulling another aircraft, and she was flying through a thunderstorm and facing a strong headwind. Going back was a lot harder than the journey there had been. The helicopter was running out of fuel, so she knew she had to find a place to land. Kyle suggested she find an empty field. She gradually lowered the aircraft's altitude. Kyle's helicopter was still hanging from the rope. As they approached the ground, he flung out of the ladder, climbed down, and untied the rope attached to his helicopter. Once it was safely on the ground, Rebecca landed hers. As the propeller stopped, she sat back in her seat, exhausted. She felt as if all her energy had been sucked out of her. The excitement of the rescue had finally caught up to her. She turned to Kyle. "I don't think I have the strength to get up." He bent over and gently lifted her out of the seat, but instead of carrying her out of the aircraft, he took her to the back. He then sat next to her and looked straight into her eyes. "I knew you would come for me. There was never any doubt in my mind." She met his gaze. His hair, his face, and his clothes were all wet. She caressed his cheek tenderly. "Of course. I would never leave you behind." "You saved me, Becky. I'll never forget that. My heart belongs to you. Everything I have is yours." Tears welled up in her eyes. "I only want you." "I'm so glad to hear that. because I only want you to." Rebecca's heart skipped a beat as Kyle leaned in. She was half expecting him to kiss her on the lips like he had done the other day, but he didn't. Instead, he rubbed his nose against hers. The rough stubble on his chin tickled her skin. She felt that everything between them had finally been settled and that they belonged together. The rain was still pouring down. She couldn't see anything outside the helicopter window, but she knew they had landed in a green field. She leaned against Kyle's chest. "I'm so tired. I feel like I could sleep forever." "Then get some rest. There's no hurry. We can leave once the rain lets up." She yawned, and soon she was fast asleep. He could hear her steady breathing. He gently lay her down on the seat and covered her with a blanket. He thought about the events of the past few hours. He remembered gathering the cultural relics, getting into his helicopter, and discovering that it was low on fuel. He had been able to see the floodwaters approaching him at a rapid pace, and he had known that if he didn't take off, he would get caught in the flood. He had been thinking about Rebecca the whole time and how he couldn't stand to see her cry again, like that day they had found out that Callum had driven off the cliff. He had wanted nothing more than to pull her brother safely out of the river, but no matter how much they had searched, they hadn't been able to find him. Not wanting her to suffer the pain of losing him too, he had taken the risk to fly back to the base. Luckily, he had discovered the half-submerged stone pillar, which had saved him. He had used all his skills and knowledge to maneuver his aircraft toward it and land on it, and he had patiently waited for her to show up. He watched her sleeping. She looked so serene and calm. At that moment, he knew they were destined to be together. It was no coincidence that they had met as children and had discovered each other again years later at the military base in Mexico. He leaned over and gently kissed her on the forehead. His heart was full of love. She continued to sleep soundly, moving her body ever so slightly so she could rest on his shoulder. He carefully took his phone out of his pocket and was pleased to discover that there was signal. He had received several messages from his squad members, so he replied to Lee, saying that he and Rebecca were safe. He sent his coordinates, asking him to pick them up since their helicopters were both low on fuel. He then closed his eyes and fell fast asleep. Kyle was woken up later by the sound of someone banging on the helicopter door. He looked at Rebecca, who had just opened her eyes. "What's that?" she murmured. "Nothing. Go back to sleep." She nodded and closed her eyes again. He tiptoed to the door and opened it. Lee was standing there. He wanted to ask Kyle if they were okay, but the latter shushed him. "Quiet. Be careful not to wake Becky. She's exhausted." He nodded toward his helicopter that was a few hundred feet away. "There's my aircraft. I ran out of fuel, but I managed to save it from the flood with Becky's helicopter. Can you put some fuel in it and fly it back to the base?" Lee nodded. "I brought some of the other guys with me. Do you want us to wait for you?" "No, go on ahead. I'm going to wait for her to wake up." "Are you planning on going back to the base?" "Yeah, I think so." After Lee left, Kyle closed the door and sat back down with Rebecca in his arms. Rebecca woke up a few hours later and rubbed her eyes. Her legs were numb, but she felt warm and well-rested. She looked over at Kyle, who was curled up next to her, and she smiled when she saw that he was sleeping peacefully. She marveled at how attractive he was with his prominent chin and chiseled face. She was lying in his arms, and his back was resting against the cabin wall. She could hear the wind howling outside as raindrops pelted the window. It was quiet and calm inside the helicopter, however. Rebecca was careful not to wake him as she sat up. His arms were wrapped tightly around her, and she could feel the warmth of his body. She thought how wonderfully strange it was to be in a foreign country, holding each other and facing the odds as a team. It was the kind of romance she had longed for ever since she was a child. She was happy she didn't have to wait to fall in love. She was already 18, and she knew exactly what she wanted. Rebecca sighed happily. At that moment, Kyle opened his eyes and found her gazing at him with adoration. "Hey, you're awake. I thought you were going to sleep till tomorrow." He moved his head. "My neck is so stiff." "I woke up a few minutes ago. I slept like a baby. I even forgot we were in a helicopter. Yeah, it's nice and cozy here. You must be starving by now, though. She nodded. I am. I only had a sandwich for lunch, and that was hours ago. The base isn't far from here. Leah and the others left a car here for us. I told them to put fuel in my helicopter and fly it back to our squad's base. He looked out the window. It's raining cats and dogs out there. It doesn't look like it'll let up for a while. Stay here while I check out the car. He grabbed a raincoat, climbed out of the aircraft, and ran over to the car that was parked a few feet away. Everything seemed to be intact, so he returned to the helicopter. He removed his raincoat and put it on Rebecca. Here, let me carry you. She laughed. I have legs, you know. But he was insistent, so she let him pick her up. He carried her over to the car and placed her in the passenger seat. He then climbed in next to her and started the car. Where are we going to eat? Rebecca asked. I'm not sure yet. Let's meet up with the rest of our squad and see what the plans are. Maybe we can take the night off if other reinforcements have arrived. She nodded. She knew there were plenty more lives to save in the flooded town. They drove toward town. Just as they reached the outskirts, the car suddenly stuttered and then stopped. What happened? Rebecca asked. I don't know. I think it broke down. Kyle tried to start it again, but it was no use. Wait here. I'm going to check under the hood. He grabbed the raincoat and some tools from the back seat and got out. She stared out the window, wishing she could help him, but she had no idea how to repair a car. After a while, she became restless. She couldn't see what he was doing since he had lifted the hood and was blocking her view, so she opened the car door and got out. Kyle frowned when he saw her. I'm sorry. This is taking longer than I thought. Get back in the car before you get soaked. I want to watch you. Maybe I'll learn something. Some other time when the weather's nice and we're not in a hurry. Please go back. It's raining heavily and we only have one raincoat. She pouted. Do you promise to teach me then at some point? I promise. She was about to open the car door when she suddenly saw a young man in a black coat pass by. He was tall and muscular, and she thought he looked oddly familiar. Rebecca's heart started pounding as she ran after him, shouting, Callum! Rebecca started shouting Callum's name, but the man didn't seem to hear her. She was so close to him, but she didn't notice the pothole in the road, and she tripped. Just as she was about to fall, the man quickly turned around and caught her. She looked up at him. Though it was quite dark, she could see his face. She examined his nose, his eyes, and his mouth, and she concluded that it wasn't her brother after all, even though he was just as attractive. He helped her to her feet. She smiled awkwardly. Thank you. Are you okay? Even his voice was different from Callum's. She nodded, disappointed that he wasn't who she thought he was. I'm fine. I just tripped. Satisfied with her answer, he carried on walking. Rebecca stood in the rain, watching him. She felt a sudden, overwhelming sense of loss. There was something strange about the man. Though he didn't look like Callum and was more aloof, he walked with the same confidence as her brother, and he was about the same age. She just couldn't shake the feeling that he was oddly familiar, so she chased after him again. Hey, wait up! The man stopped in his tracks, turned around, and looked at her in bewilderment. I'm sorry to bother you, but can you tell me your name? He sized her up. It's Chester. Oh, okay. She looked carefully at his face. There were no signs of scars or plastic surgery, so she was sure then that he wasn't Callum. She watched him turn around and leave. Kyle, who had finished repairing the car, went up to her. Who was that you were talking to just now? I thought he was Callum, but when I took a closer look, I realized he wasn't. He told me his name's Chester. Don't you think he looks like my brother from the back, though? Kyle frowned. I don't see the resemblance. She sighed with frustration. I was so hopeful. What a disappointment. He patted her on the back. I'm sorry. Come on, let's go back to the car. I fixed it. They drove to the squad's base near the camp. As soon as they arrived, they received their next assignment. The town they had evacuated earlier was completely underwater, so it was too dangerous to return to look for survivors. However, several towns on the other side of the mountain had also been damaged by the earthquake, so they were to search for the wounded. The squad split up into teams, and everyone set off. Rebecca and Kyle gathered some supplies and flew off in his helicopter, which had been refueled and was waiting for them at the base. That evening, tens of thousands of miles away, Jonathan received an email notification from the Smart Private Eye system. He always checked the results of the day's screening and analysis to see if something interesting had come up. He clicked on the link in the email, and a picture of Chester appeared on his screen. He examined it closely. He didn't recognize the person or the name, but there was something oddly familiar about him. He forwarded the email to Norman with a message asking him to check out the person's background, location, and next of kin. Norman sent him the results of his investigation a few hours later. When Jonathan read the report, he called him immediately. "Norman, tell our men to go to the area in Bolivia where this photo was taken and see what's there." As soon as Norman received Jonathan's orders, he called his men stationed in Bolivia and instructed them accordingly. They rushed over to the area and found a decrepit building that looked suspicious. They opened the metal door leading to the basement. They walked along a long, dark tunnel until they arrived at the end, where they found another door. They could smell a stench coming from inside, and when they entered the room, they found the corpse of a man who had died a few days ago. The basement had several rooms, but no windows. The air vents were barely working. They explored the rooms and found various training equipment, some boxing gloves, and tools. Norman conveyed the information to Jonathan, who then instructed him to inform the relevant authorities. "And find this Chester guy and get a sample of his DNA pronto." After speaking to Norman, Jonathan called Oliver. "I think I found something. I hope you can work with me on this." Oliver listened to what he had to say. After their conversation, he turned his attention back to the report on Bruno that his assistant had given him. Layla had asked Reggie to look for Bruno, but his search had been fruitless. No one knew where he had gone. Although his daughter hadn't told him about her relationship with Bruno, Oliver knew that she had fallen in love with him. He wasn't happy about it, but he knew he couldn't stop her. She was a grown woman who was already at university. He had asked Zoe about Bruno, since she had practically raised him, but she had been just as surprised as everyone else about his mysterious disappearance. So he had decided to do a bit of investigating himself. He had discovered everything about Bruno's past, including the Healy brothers' deaths by poison and Bruno's attempted suicide in the hospital. He had also found out from a nurse at the hospital that a stranger had gone to visit him one evening. Oliver had a strange feeling that someone was targeting his entire family. He was sure that Bruno had gotten involved with some sort of underground organization. After studying the report thoroughly, he called Stuart. "Get everything ready. We're going to Martinique in 2 days to finalize the deal." At the Polytech University in Havana, Layla and her friends went to the canteen for lunch. They sat down at a table and they began to gossip. One of the girls announced that the gorgeous guy in their computer science class had a girlfriend. They stared at her in astonishment. "No way," another girl said, shaking her head in disbelief. "When did this happen? Who is she?" "She's studying to be an actress. She's already a minor celebrity from what I've heard." "Wow, that's incredible. So he found himself an actress. I hope they break up." They burst out laughing. Speaking from experience, they probably will. Relationships don't last forever, you know. I've fallen in and out of love more times than I care to remember. That's so true. Thank goodness there are plenty of fish in the sea. Why would anyone tie themselves down at this age? They then turned to Layla. "Are you still waiting for your boyfriend to return? He's been gone a long time. Don't you think it's time you moved on? He probably has." She forced a smile and waved her hand dismissively. "I've already forgotten about him. Besides, who wants to be in a relationship? It's nothing but trouble." The girl sitting next to her patted her on the back. "That's the spirit. Though I'm sure someone will snatch you up soon. You're so beautiful and talented. You're going to meet some rich, handsome guy and make him very happy. You don't need to worry about staying single for long. Layla shrugged. I don't mind. I have a busy schedule, and I always have plans for the weekend. Hanging out with all of you is enough for me. I would never let some guy come between us. I bet your father will arrange for you to marry someone after you graduate. The others nodded in agreement. That's true. Rich parents always make sure their kids marry into the right families. Layla's heart sank. She couldn't imagine marrying anyone but Bruno. It was true that a lot of rich families arranged marriages for their children. That thought filled Layla with horror. So how long will I wait for Bruno before my family arranges a marriage for me? Her friends waited for her to say something. Even if you don't get married, Layla, you can't carry on like this. What's your deadline? We know you're still waiting for Bruno. How long are you prepared to wait? She sighed. I don't know. A year? 5 years? I never expected to be put in this situation. The girls waited patiently for her response, which was a long time coming. 5 years? He was 5 years old when I first met him, so that's how long I'll wait for him. She figured it was a reasonable amount of time. If he didn't return to her within 5 years, it probably meant that he no longer loved her and wouldn't want to marry her anyway. She wouldn't blame him if he didn't. She had left when he needed her the most, and that had been bothering her ever since his disappearance. She had even sent him numerous messages over the past few days, which she could tell had been opened and read, but she hadn't received a single response. She assumed he no longer wanted anything to do with her, and that was why he had moved away, never to see her again. Layla and her friends finished their lunch and left the canteen. Layla had some books to return to the library, so she did that while the others went back to their rooms. To get to the college library, she had to cross the sports field. As she was walking across the grass, her thoughts were disturbed by the sound of a voice shouting at her. She turned to see who it was, but before she knew what was happening, she had been tackled to the ground, and her assailant was groaning in pain beside her. Layla pushed the boy aside and got to her feet. She checked herself and found she was uninjured, but the boy who had tackled her was rolling around on the ground, clutching his arm. Beside him on the grass was a shot put. Just then, another boy went running up to them. I'm so sorry. I was just practicing my shot put, and it slipped out of my hand and went backward. I didn't see you there. He looked with concern at the boy on the ground. Are you all right? I think my arm is fractured. In the confusion, Layla wondered what on earth had just happened. Then, it dawned on her that the boy on the ground had saved her from being hit by the shot put, but in doing so, he had gotten hit himself. She took out her phone. I'll call an ambulance. No, I'll go to the medical center. The boy was adamant that he didn't need to be taken away in an ambulance. Layla put her phone away, and she and the boy who had thrown the shot put helped the boy who had been hit onto his feet, and then they led him to the college medical center. The doctor arranged for an x-ray to be taken of the boy's arm. I'm afraid you've fractured your right forearm, Sean. You'll need to get a plaster cast. Sean groaned. Is it badly broken, Doc? It's not that serious, but you need to keep the cast on for 4 weeks. You'll have to pay for the treatment in advance, so take your student ID to the front desk. The person will arrange it for you. I'll pay it, Layla said. Sean looked at her in astonishment. Why would you do that? You're not the one who caused this. He pointed to the other boy. He's the one who should pay for my treatment. The boy with the shot put knew he was in the wrong and accepted responsibility. With a nod, he headed toward the front desk to pay the fee, and then he and Layla waited while Sean's arm was put into a plaster cast. I'm sorry for what happened. I know it was my fault, so I'll take care of all the costs. My name's Archie, by the way. I'm in my 2nd year. Here's my student ID so you can see I'm telling the truth. He held his ID card out for Sean and Layla to see. I have to get back to class now, so I'll leave my ID card with you guys if you like. We can talk about compensation later. There's no need for you to leave your card with us, Sean said. We know who you are now. Go back to class, but I'll make sure you don't forget to pay for my medical expenses. Archie left, and Layla finally had time to thank Sean for saving her. Thank you so much for what you did. If it wasn't for you, I might have been hit in the head. The shot put had indeed been hurtling toward Layla's head. If Sean hadn't jumped in at the right moment, the consequences could have been unimaginable. It's okay. I only did what anyone would have done. Sean glanced at his watch. Don't you have to get back to class too? I don't have classes this afternoon. I've got nothing until this evening. She hesitated. Can I get you some water or something? Yeah, that'd be great, thanks. What's your name, by the way? What are you majoring in? My name's Layla, and I'm a first-year software designer. I think I've heard of you. You know what? Forget the water. I could use a coffee. I'll get you one. And Layla headed off to buy Sean a coffee. In the weeks that followed, Layla visited Sean often. He was a gentle and friendly personality, and because he couldn't move his right hand, he began to learn how to use his left hand for most things. But the one thing he found difficult to master with his left hand was writing. So one day, when Layla met him in the self-study room, she started to help him organize his notes, and it quickly became a daily occurrence. Sean would borrow his classmates' notes, and Layla would type them up for him on his laptop. Sometimes, as she copied the notes, he would go and get drinks. He would get himself a black coffee, and for her, a skim latte, which was her favorite. He never once asked her to pay. Layla had just returned to her dorm after another session with Sean in the self-study room when her roommates started teasing her. So, Layla, what's going on with you and this Sean guy? Have you got the hots for him or something? No, he saved me from certain death. I owe him. I just help him with his lecture notes, that's all. Your savior, huh? Is that the way he sees it too? Or is he just using your perceived debt of gratitude to get you to trust him so he can persuade you to repay him in other, more intimate ways? Phoebe grinned, but she was half serious. I think Sean's a good guy, one of the other girls said. He mightn't be a student leader, but he's up there with the likes of Jamie, the head of construction. Yeah, Layla, that's true. My guess is he'll be elected to head of his division next year. I mean, Nathan from journalism is no better than him. Don't you think Nathan's in touch with his feminine side? Sean's quite similar in that he's one of those guys who's good-looking and considerate. I like that in a man. Don't you? The more the girls talked, the more enthusiastic they became. I think you should seize the opportunity to snare him, Layla. You could do a lot worse. Layla rolled her eyes at them. It would be a colossal waste of your talent if you guys didn't become matchmakers. Do you know that? All I do is help Sean with his notes every day. That's it. We don't talk about anything else. Besides, I'm pretty sure he doesn't like me in that way anyway. So that's enough, okay? How do you know he doesn't have feelings for you? Phoebe wasn't going to give up that easily. I think if a single man doesn't have feelings for you, he must be blind. Or gay. Layla couldn't argue with her roommates anymore. I want to thank you for thinking so highly of me, but not everyone thinks the same as you. If you think you know what's good for me, why don't you find the perfect partner for me? Everyone laughed, and it was obvious to the girls that Layla didn't take their words to heart. After that, she continued to meet up with Sean and help him with his notes almost every day. As for Sean, he was the perfect gentleman and never once made any advances toward her. During the 4 weeks in which his arm was in a cast, the two of them became good friends. Layla was pleased to discover that they shared a lot of interests. They liked the same kind of music, and they both liked going to concerts. They enjoyed the same sports, and even followed the same teams. On the day that Sean's cast was due to be removed, Layla and Archie both accompanied him to the medical center. The doctor examined his arm and confirmed that the fracture had healed. He cut the plaster off, and Sean was thrilled to feel the air against the skin of his arm once again. Archie was relieved to see that the injury he had caused had healed well, and he offered to treat the two of them to a meal in the canteen. Sean and Layla gratefully accepted, and the three of them ate together. From that day on, Sean no longer needed Layla's help with his notes, but they agreed that it would be a shame to stop meeting, so they continued to see each other from time to time. Sometimes, he would call her to the library and show her some books he thought she would enjoy. Other times, he would share the music of a new band he had discovered with her. Gradually, they grew closer and closer, and soon, a rumor began that they were seeing each other romantically. Layla ignored the rumors and continued to enjoy Sean's company. Perhaps it was because he was in the Williams family, or perhaps he got there through his merit. But 2 weeks after the start of school, Sean made it to the top 3 most popular candidates for the role of student leader. He was about to occupy the spot that had been vacated by Bruno. One day, Layla was flicking through her social media accounts when she saw a post from Phoebe. She continued to look through her friend's recent posts until she found a picture of Bruno. The photo had been taken by one of his classmates, and in it, he was sitting at a desk and looking confidently at the camera. With it was another photo of him in profile, walking along the road that ran through the college. Layla stopped scrolling and stared at the 2 images. Bruno had been one of the most important people in her life. He had occupied a huge portion of it, and she had even given herself to him. It was difficult for her to accept that he was gone from her life for good, and seeing his photo again brought all the memories back. It had been more than 6 months since she had last seen him. She had no idea where he was or who he was with. She often wondered whether she would ever have the chance to see him again. As she stared at his photo, the pent-up emotions finally burst out, and she buried her face in her hands and cried. The reality was ironic. His post as student leader had been vacated, and people had gradually forgotten him, but it looked as if his position was going to be filled by a new potential love interest. Rebecca and Kyle had been saving people in Ecuador for several days. From the initial evacuation process right up until the flood, they had worked tirelessly to move as many civilians as possible from the site. They continued that way for 2 full weeks, until almost all the residents had been relocated to nearby towns. The area they had been relocated to was very different from the other area they had been in. It had received no rain and was very dry. On one particular morning, Rebecca awoke to a bright red sky. Ash from the volcano had been raining down on them ever since that fateful day, casting an eerie orange glow in the sky. The dryness of the air was beginning to cause health issues with some of the evacuees, but they had no choice but to remain where they were. Makeshift refugee camps had been set up for them, and most people had nowhere else to go. No one knew what the future held for them, and where they ended up would depend on the decisions made by government officials, who had no real idea of the sense of displacement the people were feeling. Rebecca got out of bed and washed her face with a wet face cloth. Since the eruption, water had been in short supply, and no one had been able to shower for 3 days. As the townsfolk began to go about their daily business, Rebecca and Kyle prepared for their departure that afternoon. They decided to take a stroll together around the town that would forever be in the shadow of the volcano. The refugee camp was overflowing, and many homeless people were living on the streets. They had set up makeshift homes on the cold, hard road, and Rebecca's heart broke for them. At least it's warm and dry here. They found a small cafe that was still open, and they went inside. The elderly owner was delighted to see them, and she escorted them to her best table. As they thanked the lady, Kyle's phone rang, and he stepped outside to take the call, while Rebecca ordered breakfast and coffee. She took some local currency out of her pocket to pay the lady, but the lady pushed Rebecca's hand away. "But you have a business to run," Rebecca objected. "We must pay you for our breakfast." But the old lady insisted. "You're my son's saviors." She spoke in a local dialect, and Rebecca struggled to understand her heavily accented words. "You're my son's saviors. You saved my 2 sons when the volcano erupted and brought them here. You're my family's heroes." Rebecca was astonished. She had rescued a lot of people, but she hadn't expected to meet a relative of any of them in a small cafe. The old lady continued to explain. "My 2 sons had a farm near Ambato, where the land is fertile. Crops grow better there than anywhere else, probably because of the nutrients in the volcanic soil. Anyway, when the volcano erupted, you saved them. They're still in the hospital, but the doctor says that their lives are no longer in danger. After a few more days of intravenous fluids, they should be well enough to go home." Rebecca was happy to hear the old lady's story. It was always good to hear something positive come from so much pain and anguish. "Yes, ma'am. I would say that your sons have a great future ahead of them after surviving such a disaster. I wish them all the very best of luck." "Thank you, dear." The old lady smiled broadly at her, and then she nodded toward Kyle, who was still outside, talking on his phone. "Your husband looks like a nice man. I think you and he also have a great future together. I have decades of experience when it comes to judging people, and I can see he's a good match for you. Take good care of him."